Welcome to the Up Close Podcast, your home for conversations about the present and future of public education. On today's episode, we're going to explore one of the most critical issues facing this country, and that is a teacher shortage, an educator shortage. Now more than at any time in recent memory, we know that educators are leaving the profession at alarming rates. And a national survey that was conducted by the National Education Association earlier this year revealed that a whopping 55% of educators are considering leaving the profession earlier than planned. And yet we know that a quality public education starts with quality educators. We need quality educators and education support professionals in our public education system. So here with us today, we are so honored that with us today, we have someone who is uniquely and distinctly qualified to speak to this issue, to help us to understand it and to know how it is being addressed and how it can be addressed and how we all can contribute to meeting this need in our country. I am so honored to welcome and to introduce to some and reintroduce to others President Becky Pringle, President of the NEA, the National Education Association. Welcome, Becky.
It's good to be with you, Sara.
Let me tell you a little bit about President Pringle. Becky has the awesome task of leading more than 3 million educators and education support professionals who are members of the NEA in this country. She is a former middle school teacher. She has more than 31 years of classroom experience, and she is very well known for, in particular, putting educators and students first in a way that is focused on transforming public education into a racially and socially just and equitable system that can prepare every student to succeed in a diverse world. So we are just so honored. I will tell you that during her time with the NEA, among her other accomplishments, President Pringle has co-chaired the NEA's task force on school discipline and a school to prison pipeline. But let me tell you something. If I were to enumerate all of President Pringle's accomplishments, we would be here all day. So at this point, I am just going to welcome Becky again and once again say how excited we are to have this important conversation with you as we look to the future of public education. Let's dive in. Earlier this year, the NEA published a report on the educator shortage that's gripping the nation's public schools. And through that report, you outlined a long list of research-based solutions effective at recruiting and retaining educators, and most importantly, reflecting the needs and priorities of educators themselves. So from where you sit, can you tell us why you think educators are at this time rethinking their place in the teaching profession, the education profession, and whether or not they can remain as educators?
Sara, again, it's so good to be with you. I want to emphasize the part of my bio that talks about experience in education. I taught middle school science. Yes, there's a special place in heaven for me and other middle school teachers. I taught middle level learners the joys of science for over 30 years. So when I talk about the educator crisis, I talk about it from a place of experience, knowledge, as an educator. Now, as president of the NEA, not only do I have that experience as a leader in the association and bringing to bear the full force, weight, power, strength of the largest labor union in this country, but I do it from that lens of being a teacher. This is not a new crisis. This is chronic. It has existed when I was in a classroom, and it exists now. Just like with everything else, the pandemic made it worse because that's what the pandemic did. And the pandemic, honestly, helped us shine a light on something that we've been talking about and trying to sound the alarm around for many, many years. And so the report that the NEA issued, and it's one of the things that I insisted on because of the conversations that I had with educators all over this country when I did what I called my Joy, Justice, and Excellence tour. And I just asked educators, teachers, and support staff nurses, counselors, aspiring educators, and retired educators. Questions. Just ask questions and held space
Mm-hmm.
for them to share with me what their hopes and dreams were, what their concerns were. Help me understand why we saw in our survey 55% of our educators talking about leaving the profession. Help me understand that. And not just the why, but what could change that would change their minds about leaving. And so the report is full of research-based solutions, as you said, and I want to emphasize it really is the voice and experience of our educators when we talk about those solutions. And Sara, I'm sure I know you've heard this word because educators everywhere are using this word. They tell me that it's about respect. And I get that. I absolutely get that. As a teacher, we never, had the level of respect and support that we should have as the professionals we are. When I asked them to peel that away, kind of dig into that, what does that look like? What does respect look like to you? They were very clear about what that looked like to them. And they started with being treated as the professionals they are. And for them, that meant that they had the authority and the collective autonomy to make teaching and learning decisions for their students.
Mm-hmm.
What it meant for them is that they earned a professional salary that reflected the important role they played in our society. What it meant for them is that they got to make professional decisions about how they spent their time in a way that they could attend to the individual needs of students, could welcome and include parents as partners, could collaborate with their colleagues. For them, it meant us treating the teaching profession as a continuum of practice, professional practice. At the front end, as they were preparing as aspiring educators to become teachers, and then a continued focus on improving their professional practice. And then having those opportunities to lead in their professions. They talked about all of those things. And they talked about the reality that they can't do it by themselves, that we all own and share responsibility. When we say every student, that we actually mean every student will succeed. So we need all of the social systems surrounding our children with the support they need so they are ready to come to school, prepared to learn every day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Becky, for sharing all of that. And there's so many things that you've said that I'd like to follow up on. You've spoken about how educators want choice and autonomy as they lead in their classrooms and the opportunity to innovate. And I think that for those who've not been in a classroom, they might imagine, well, of course, that's what educators do. That's what educators have the opportunity to do. But you talk about it as something that educators are hoping for more of. What are the barriers right now to exercising that autonomy?
Well, first of all, everyone who ever went to school thinks they know what teachers and other educators do and feel that they should make decisions about what it looks like to be able to say that all of our students are prepared to take that next step in their learning journey. They are prepared to enter the workforce and to earn salaries that can take care of their families. They are prepared to go on to college if that's what they choose to do, or go on to technical training, additional training. That they are prepared to be the leaders of a just society and participate fully in that, in our democracy. All of those things that we want for our students are trained. They go to school, as you very well know. They have to graduate and be licensed, and they have to have content skills, knowledge, skills, and ability, as well as pedagogical skills, all of those things, and it's continuous training. All of that goes into making those key decisions so that we can meet students where they are and help them along their learning journey. And so when I talk about professional authority and collective, and I'm very intentional about using that word, Sara, when I say collective authority, it's not that I don't want anyone to get an idea in their head that teachers should go into their classrooms and close their doors and not collaborate with their colleagues. It doesn't suggest that we as educators don't know and embrace the responsibility for continuous learning with our colleagues and with others. So that's why I use that phrase intentionally, collective
Mhm,
authority,
mhm,
that
mhm.
we're making decisions that are best for our students in collaboration with others, other educators, with our parents, with the students themselves. So much needs to be attended to around student agency in their own learning. So all of those things go in for educators, go into that concept of a professional authority and collective autonomy.
What do you think can be done, President Pringle, to increase those opportunities for educators and to open the door and to let them know that they have the respect they deserve, they have the support they deserve?
Well, first of all, they are in positions where they're making decisions.
Mhm.
I've used this word a lot myself, and we use it a lot. We talk about educator voice, and absolutely, their voice is paramount to getting it right for students. But it can't just be voice. It can't be, oh my goodness, well, we're going to invite you to share what you think, but we're going to make decisions. We are the deciders, and we'll be making the decisions. There's have to be in that seat of decision making. And then, as I said before, not in isolation, but they have to be able to make those decisions. That's what it looks like for them. They have to
Mhm.
know that they have the resources that they need to meet the needs, growing needs. We could talk about that on a whole nother segment, Sarah.
Yes, yes.
It's always been true that students bring, all the ills and challenges of society right to our schoolhouse doors. That's always been true, but it
Yes.
certainly has grown over the years. And after the pandemic, even more so, the trauma, the social and emotional needs, all of that, and everyone
Yes.
sees that.
Yes.
And so we have to have the resources to do the jobs we love. We have
Yes.
to, address the fact that we've disinvested in public education for decades. We can't just make
Yes.
that up with a one-time infusion of money. We've got to make that up in a way that we imagine our
Yes.
system, in a way that we fund it in an equitable
Yes.
way so that all of our students, all of them, get what they need.
I love the passion with which you provide that response, and you touch on something that is also really kind of close to my heart because I've been at this nexus of education advocacy, and philanthropy for a while. And one of the things that grieves me is when philanthropies and other funders believe that they, because of some research perhaps that they have done, feel that they have a solution that now should be executed by educators, where educators have not been central in the formation of those ideas and those practices and so forth. I think if there, I don't know that there's necessarily a question what I have just said, but it's further comment on what you have said. It is so important that educator voice and educator leadership is shaping instructional practice and more in schools. I don't know if before I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn. I don't know if you want to jump in further
I
on that,
do. I
Becky.
love the way you just phrase that, Sarah. So I want to lift it up that educators are central in the formation of ideas. And I would add, because sometimes that happens, and then it takes on this other, reality, because then educators are not then central to the
Hmm.
implementation and central into ensuring that the resources are there. So they've got to be central at each of those pieces because we got lots of ideas. I don't know if you and I, Sarah, will talk about one of our loves that we share, and that is community schools. But,
Yes.
that's an example, and I could give you many because, like I said, I've been around a minute. So I see good ideas that educators actually promoted get implemented in a way that just absolutely are not founded or executed in a way that educators would imagine or certainly would do themselves. So it's got to be central to the formation of the ideas, central to the implementation, central to the assessment, right? And the learning. We're educators who want to continuously learn, and then
Yes.
to the what we call. I wish I could come up with a better term than this, but what we call scoping and scaling. And you and I are talking about.
Hmm.
I'm not sure I want to use that phrase, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
Spreading the learnings, and in a way that we have identified those core and key principles but not in a
Mhm.
way that we're lifting it from this place and plopping it in another place and saying, do this and you'll be fine. No, that actually flies in the face of
Yeah.
that collective and collaborative autonomy, so that
Yeah.
school, that community is a part of it, right? And they own it. And it's about them and it reflects their highest ideals. So I love that you said it that way. And I wanted to just expand on that.
Thank you so much. And I want to take a little bit of a turn, Becky, because, this issue of educator voice and celebrating, recognizing first, and then celebrating the contributions of educators, not only to their classrooms, but to communities, such a critical thing to explore. But we know that amid the national crisis, there is even a further deepening crisis among educators of color
Mm.
and our growing, not our growing, but our longstanding need to see more educators of color in the profession. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned through your report, preparation of that report, and what the NEA's position is now on this issue of, in particular, increasing teachers of color in this country?
So you're right, that it's a long time issue. There's no question about that. And I want to talk about it from this perspective. And in your first question, you asked about the attracting and retaining. And especially in this conversation, Sarah, we have to pay attention to the retention piece of things. There's
Yes.
no question that the number of college students of color who are making the choice to go into education has declined. We know that is true. And when, I'm struggling with saying, however, they leave at such a higher rate
Yeah.
that the retention problem is almost more critical.
Yes.
And so I want to call attention to that. Yeah, and I'm gonna lift up the work of Dr. Ivory Tolson, who has
Yes.
done extraordinary work in higher education and served and has supported our work around HBCUs and MSIs. And he really was the first one to kind of grab my face and said, Becky, we appreciate that you're lifting that up, that we need more students of color to go in. But you need to be aware of the retention issue, because if
Yes.
you're not aware of that, not only are you not going to solve the retention issue, you really, in looking at the retention issue, it actually helps you on the attracting piece of things. And so he digs down into that in his research, which I really encourage your listeners to dig into. It does expose some of those things that we have to address on both sides. So one of the things with teachers of color, students of color choosing teaching, and then after they get into teaching, if they choose it, staying in teaching, is
Hmm.
the reality that in this country, we have never, and it's just gotten worse, addressed the issue of the cost of higher education.
Mm.
And so we have students of color who are graduating with
Hmm.
massive amounts of debt. Why is
Hmm.
that uniquely impacting them at a rate? That's because our students of color tend to come from families that don't have generational wealth, or that's an overstatement, right? And they don't have parents that maybe can step in and take over those student loans. So they're starting their career where they have mountains of debt. They're putting off having families. They're making choices about, where they live or what they can do. And they then say, I can't do it. And they leave. And students in college are making that decision too. And looking at teaching and saying, wait a minute, I am accumulating all this debt. And I just can't. I can't choose teaching as a career because I know I'm never gonna earn the kind of pay that's commensurate with the work that I do. And so you've got to address it at the same.
Mm.
The other thing two other things I want to highlight, we talk about diversifying the profession
Yes.
oftentimes, and we point to the impact. We have research on this, the impact that a teacher of color can have on a student of color, especially multiple teachers of color, having them in a row. We
Hmm.
have
Hmm.
evidence. But we also have evidence, Sarah, that having a diverse workforce impacts white students too, in a positive.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
got to tell both sides of the story. And then the last thing I could go on and on about this, but the last thing I want to lift up is, and this comes directly from our students, our aspiring educators, as well as our early career educators of color. And that is that they get into the profession or they're aspiring to it, and they just don't have that support system, that network
Yes.
to help
Yes.
in the unique circumstances they find them. And so those are the kinds of things that we heard from them. And those are the kinds of programs that NEA is putting in place and
Yes.
partnering with institutions of higher education. We're partnering with the Department of Education and
Yes.
others to try to specifically address this need that our students and educators of color have lifted up for us.
And many of us we have great hope for that work and how it will continue and help to transform this experience, the situation. We know also, Becky, there's another dimension of that, which is grievous and which our listeners may not be aware of. Folks now talk about as the LIFO issue, the fact last in, first out. And as we have a hope to recruit and retain more teachers of color, it also is a practice across many industries and professions that those who are last hired by a place tend to be the ones who, if mix or other factors require some reduction, they are then the first to go. And of course, that's counterproductive to our desire to see a growth in teachers of color across the country. What is the position of the NEA on that, and what do you think can be done so that this doesn't become sort of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back phenomenon?
So, Sarah, that's an example of an issue where if you address it from a place of contention
Mm-hmm.
and sides,
Mm-hmm.
instead of collaboration, particularly in this instance, labor management, I'll be specific, labor management collaboration, which is an initiative that NEA has partnered actually with national partners, national school
Yes.
boards. We partner with the school administrators, with the AFT, NEA, have come together and partnered to promote what we call labor management collaboration. And the reason I bring that up in this context, Sarah, because it's all LIFO. It's always brought up in a way that the unions are the reason why, because of contracts. That's why we have to let the last in go first. When we know that for us, we are about collaborating with others to do
Absolutely.
the best job we possibly can for our students and for our educators. They're always tying back to the fact that we need more educators and we need to support them. And so we've seen and been a part of and worked with locals, the most recent of which is our local in Minneapolis in Minnesota, where we talked about that very issue of having a disproportionate number of our teachers of color just coming into the profession, and then they would be the ones that were targeted to leave or be fired. So first of all, the way we approached it there and in other places is why are we doing that? We need more teachers. So let's just why is anybody leaving? Why is that happening? That shouldn't be happening. So what are we doing to resource that district so that they're not letting go of any educators? We need more. So that we start there and come together and collaborate together to get the resources so that we can lower those class size. Nobody's leaving. We're bringing more in. So there's that. Additionally, we know when we talk about it from that contentious place, we talk about it as though other educators are expendable. That's not true. We need our middle level, we need our mid-career teachers, our early career educators, our mid-career educators as mentors. So that's why it's so important to build the processes, systems, and structures to support collaboration throughout the system so that we have all of the educators, the new mid and veteran educators of color in every category, educators that bring a wealth of experience geographically and other diversity in other ways, and not set this issue up as a false choice, which it should not be. But we have to collaborate together, and it should never be used as a way to suggest that we are not working to diversify our profession.
Well, I am so appreciative of that statement, and especially President Pringle, how throughout in responding, you have underscored again and again the importance of collaboration. I think, at this time in our country's experience, we're learning across industries and professions that this skill and will and ability to engage in collaborative solution making is the way forward. And anything that contributes to contention is counter our nation's best, and nations plural, best interest, right? So I really, really appreciate that. You obliquely mentioned the community schools earlier, and our past two podcasts have focused on community schools, but there again, right, as in solution making for increased educational justice in this country, the basic premise is one of collaboration. It is certainly something that I know the NEA and the NEA Foundation prioritize heavily. As we think about those kinds of collaborations now, as we turn towards solutions and what can be done to turn around this crisis of teachers and other educators and education support professionals leaving classrooms and schools and school districts and their communities, what could be done collaboratively? Because we know it's a shared responsibility. It's a part of the public interest that there is adequate support for educators. And so what can be done first and foremost around this issue of teacher pay and appropriate compensation? What are the recommendations that are being put forth by the NEA in that respect?
So we're using strategies to address the issue of teacher pay. So first of all, we're pushing our partners, our allies, of course, but also others in business, philanthropy. They need to use their own bully pulpits to say, we need to respect, celebrate, use that word before, honor, and pay our teachers in a way that reflects, that's commensurate with the important work that they do and play in this society. We know that public education is the foundation of this democracy. And so for those people who have made that choice to educate America's students, we've got to collectively own that responsibility to elevate the profession. So I wanted to say that. For us at the NEA, it is about using a variety of strategies. So it's a union, of course, we're going to use our strategy of collective bargaining where we can. And we have work with our locals to use that to not only strongly for increases in pay, but to do a couple of things. First of all, Sara, that we fought really hard to make sure that we had elected leaders and appointed leaders who believed in public education and would support our students, public schools, and educators. And so in the passage of the American Rescue Plan, that didn't just happen. That was a lot of advocacy for that to make that happen, getting the right people in place and then making sure that they took on their responsibility to change what was happening. And that was a huge opportunity for us, certainly around community schools for sure, but also around raising the pay of teachers and getting more, not just teachers, our support staff, and as well as our counselors and nurses and all of the folks that we know our students need. So using collective bargaining to pay for higher salaries is a strategy, of course, that we've used before. Not all of our states have the ability to use collective bargaining. So we've been using strategies like the one we use in Louisiana, where our affiliate there used the legislature to teacher salaries and pay, salaries and wages and benefits. And so we use a variety of strategies to advocate for and demand higher salaries. And we know that all of that, and I said this before, Sara, so we're using the American Rescue Plan to in this moment address some of those things, but we've got to have that longer term strategy, because we know that we've got to address the decades long disinvestment in our public schools that brings us to where we are now. We can't raise teacher pay if our schools aren't being adequately resourced. We have to address that at every level. We have to address it at the local level. So fighting to raise revenues at the local level, changing how public schools are funded, and having them tied to the housing we know automatically sets up a system of inequity. So we have to address it at the local level. We have to address it at the state level. The majority of funding for our schools comes at the state level. So we have to absolutely fight that at the state legislature, fight for that at the state legislature. And then, of course, the federal government's role. One of the things that people don't always tie to what I just said is the federal government's promise to fund IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that provides resources for our students with special needs at a rate of 40%. And they never did that. And that means that the local and state have to pick that up. And so the federal government has a role to play, not just in general education funding, but specifically in special education funding. So funding is a key piece of the work we have to do to raise salaries for educators. And then lastly, I want to mention this. We've talked about wage, what we call a wage penalty gap. Which has existed, again, forever. But after the pandemic, we saw it rise throughout the pandemic. It went from around 20% to now it's a little over 25%. That means that similarly situated professions in terms of experience and education, teachers earn 25% less. That's not okay. That is a societal issue that we have to address from the highest levels of our government.
It is a societal issue indeed, and there's so many things you said I'd like to pick up on. You said quickly, but I'd like to go back to something that the NEA Foundation is also fierce about, and that is that the preservation and furtherance of public education is in the public interest. Public education is a public good. But I believe that as the NEA does such powerful work in collective bargaining and so forth, so is building public will for public education. And I'm just interested in your thoughts about that. Of course, this also is not new. It does seem that amid so many other really pressing issues the country is facing, there is this question of public education as a public good. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. And I just would add a public good, and that's the foundation of this democracy.
Absolutely, yes.
As we know, yeah, and guess what? That's our founding core principles that, that every one of our students has access to high quality public education. And we know that an educated citizen, students who are prepared to think critically and make and solve problems collaboratively, we know are absolutely essential to our country living into its promise.
Yeah.
Right? We the people, all of us have that right to pursue happiness, to be truly free. For that to be a reality for everyone, we've got to ensure that all of our students have that high quality public education. And it cannot be based on their zip code. It can't be based on their family's generational or current economic status. It can't be based on race. It has to be based on their birthright as, an American, or for those who've come to our country as immigrants, making sure that they have those opportunities. And they're not kept from those opportunities because they don't have funds to do it. So our country was founded on that. And we know that we have a whole lot of additional work to do, especially in public education, because Sara, we both know that the system of public education as it was established in this country was never designed to be a racially and socially just and equitable system. It just wasn't. That wasn't how it was designed. And that's why those of us who I would call the believers and the folks who are upholding this every day, everywhere, in every conversation, that we continue to drive that home, that we've got to transform that system into one that works for all of our students. Because if we do that, if we create a system that works for our most marginalized students, it will increase the opportunity for all of our students. And that is how our country will live into its promise.
I believe that very much myself, as does the whole of the NEA Foundation, I know. Becky, as we near the close of our time together, I'd like to ensure that even amid the many challenges that you've elucidated on this call, what you see as, I'd like to lift up what you see as really promising and encouraging, and what you, if you could have a wish list of things that would happen that would provide that critical support that you've talked about for educators and the public support in particular, what's on your wish list? For, if I, and I don't mean to diminish it by calling it a wish list, I'm just trying to say, in the most hopeful of perspectives, what are we looking for?
So we're looking for racial, social, and education justice for our students, for our educators, for our communities. That's really at the core for me. It's at the core of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, when people say to me, Becky, oh, that's a big old aspirational vision. You just, all students, all schools, all educators are excelling and everyone knows it. For us to do that, for us to, as a country, to truly embrace that, for us as a union, honestly, to work toward that, you always hear a common theme whenever I talk, and you heard it today,
Absolutely, yes.
Sara, and that is that core value of partnership. We can't do it alone. Even within our own association, Sara, I've been talking about the concept of dynamic alignment. That,
Yeah.
I'd love to say we're the largest labor union in this country. We have 51 state affiliates. We have 14,000 locals. We have 3 million members. Unless and until we are aligned in a way that's dynamic, so we're constantly learning, and with and among each other, we're reaching across and helping each other in ways that magnify that strength and power, in ways that we can win for our students all the time, every day. Unless that happens, we're not going to reach that fullest potential. So you'll always hear that in everything I say. When you talk about a wish list, it is that we continue that work together in a dynamic and aligned way toward racial, social, economic justice in this country. And that is, and everything we do, and I will tell you, Sara, every decision I make is steeped in that. Everything we do reflects that collaborative and collective responsibility for every one of our students.
What a wonderful vision, and certainly one that we share in as well. And it's a good place to start to turn toward home in this time together. One of the things that we certainly believe in, and one of the reasons that we launched this podcast, is that we do think that the preservation of public education is a public responsibility. And one of the things that we have learned is that those who are tuning into this podcast more and more are those who are not just proponents of public education and its preservation, but they are individuals who want to contribute in some way. They want to be involved in solution making. And they're not all educators. They come from all walks. So I always like to ask those who are on our podcast if you could speak to the listeners that there's something that everyone can do as pertains to this issue of a teacher shortage. How can the average person who's not in the classroom, or if someone is, what would you hope we would be doing to support this important vision of education justice and education and social justice generally? Because we believe there is a role that everyone can play.
So I would ask everyone, whether you're in education or you're not in education, to understand and own your responsibility regardless. And that necessarily means that you must or should begin or continue your journey of awareness around racial and social justice.
Yes.
Build your capacity, and you can do that individually. Reading, I'd love to recommend to folks The Sum of Us by Heather McGee.
Yes, yes.
Excellent way to understand, historically how we got to where we are and understand the interconnection of all the systems that impact us even today. So I'd like to recommend that. So you could take that individual journey, learn and read. And I would point folks to the site Ed Justice because it has lots of resources. So you can do that. And then reach out to others and have critical conversations so that you can continue that learning and building up your muscle and that kind of thing. Build partnerships. That's one of the things that NEA has been really focused on at the federal level. I
Yes.
mentioned the Department of Education. I'll mention the Department of Labor. One of the things that we're really proud about is our partnership with them in establishing registered apprenticeships for teachers. That's something completely new. $100 million the Department of Labor has put in to partner with us to have registered apprenticeships so that the aspiring educators, whether they're in education or not, can earn while they learn and be mentored by teachers. That's part of the attracting and retaining piece of things. So think about what partnerships you can engage in your communities, whether it's with civil rights organizations or with parents organizations.
Yes.
Create space for student voice.
Mm-hmm.
Invite students into the conversations and give them that space and support them in their fight. I'm so proud of them and the fight that they waged around gun violence. Huge what they did with that. So create that space for students. And then I'll go back to something I said earlier, Sara. We have to, as participants in this democracy, we have to pay attention to the people we put in positions of power. So that necessarily means asking right questions and holding people accountable. Again, not just holding them accountable. I like to say, being that wind beneath their wings so they can govern in a bold and righteous and focused and compelling and just way. Those are the kinds of things people can do right now today. Join us in our movement.
That is so awesome a response, Becky. My goodness, I will probably be pulling out that statement independent of the podcast, including it in the podcast. But that's what you have just said about how everyone can contribute to public education, the preservation, furtherance of public education, and supporting educators is a message that needs to be told in various contexts over and over again. So thank you so much for that. So President Pringle, I always like to close these podcasts by asking those we are interviewing if there is anything that they might like to add. So I'd like to see, is there anything that I have not asked you or that you would want to add to this important conversation as president of the NEA?
Oh, Sara, I shared earlier that I was in the classroom for over 30 years. And I have to tell you that in these last 2.5 years, as we all struggled through a pandemic and try to, keep our students and educators and communities safe and continue to learn and deal with the trauma of being in a global pandemic, I have never been more proud to call myself a teacher, to be an educator as I am in this moment. As I had the opportunity to not only honestly hold in my arms teachers from all over this country as they cried, and I gave space for them to share their fears and challenges, but to see the light in their eyes when I asked them what they were most proud of that they had done or what they're aspiring to do. Oh my goodness, Sara. The light in their eyes and what they share with me about what they were doing, the innovation, what they were learning, how they were helping each other, how they were taking care of not only their kids, but they were taking care of other people's families, even as their own family was struggling, as we all did in this pandemic. I have just never been prouder. And I would ask for everyone to celebrate our educators and what they have done in this moment, what they've always done, honestly, but in this moment of highest need, how they stepped up in ways we could never imagine. Take that time, please, to celebrate them, to lift them up, to say thank you, and to let them know we got you. We got you.
Wow. Well, President Pringle, it has been my great honor to have this time with you and to bring your voice to people through this podcast. Your passion, your conviction, your commitment to public education and to educators across this country. It's just palatable. It comes through not sound of your voice in ways that are just rich and wonderful. And I listeners, not unique. I hope that you have heard from President Pringle that there is a role that you can play. And it is critically important at this time that we lift up, celebrate, elevate the voices, the leadership, the contributions of educators to this country. President Pringle, thank you so much for being with the Up Close podcast. I'm sure that we will continue this conversation at some point in the future, but thank you for today. And to our listeners again, thank you so much for listening and tuning in to the Up Close podcast. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And after you do that, go back and please listen to all of the great episodes that perhaps you might have missed. I want to thank you again for tuning in, and I look forward to our next conversation. This is Sara Sneed with the Up Close podcast.